The topic for this session, the importance of being playful. One of my co-workers back in Washington who took a look at the schedule kidded me a little bit about moderating this session. And I think just the fact that I would get kidded about whether this was a serious area of inquiry, like some of the other things we're talking about this week, is proof in and of itself that we need to ask ourselves some good questions about why play and playfulness are important. Here in America, we work. And we work a lot. Hundreds of hours a year more than people in other rich countries, and in a perverse kind of way, we're proud of it, right? When we relax, we often do it in ways that are hard work. And we go at it with a will that resembles the driven behavior of our Monday through Friday lives. Play is in short supply. Play is for kids. It's not serious. And let's face it, if you're the kind of person who gets invited or signs up to come to a weekend conference like this, you're probably pretty serious to begin with, right? So joining me for this session on play are people who've been working very hard to have a lot to say on the topic. James Hill in the center is a professor of pediatrics and director of the Center for Human Nutrition at the University of Colorado, Denver. Dr. Hill is president of the Society for Nutrition and past president of the Obesity Society. Goldie Hawn, sitting just to my left, is an Academy Award-winning actress, a producer and director, and an advocate for children. She's founder of the Hawn Foundation, dedicated to giving children the social and emotional skills they need to lead smarter, happier, healthier lives. And it's a little-known fact, she can fly. And I know this only because I saw her do it in a movie, and I don't believe it was a stunt double. And Deepak Chopra is with us, author, teacher, physician, co-founder of the Chopra Center, who's been telling Americans for decades about the connection between the health of the mind and the health of the body. And, of course, after giving these quick 3-line, 4-line introductions, I would recommend that you take a look at your guide. All our guests for all our sessions are there, and a fuller accounting of all their tremendous accomplishments underneath their smiling picture. So I urge you to take a look at your conference catalog as well. Goldie Hawn, why don't you get us started? What got you interested in play, and what fuels your conviction that it's really important?
Well, first of all, this is like sort of at 11 years old, I pretty much figured that what I wanted to be in life was happy. That was a very lofty choice. People would say to me, "What do you want to be when you grow up, Goldie?" And I would look at them and say, "Happy." And they looked at me like I had 6 heads. And I thought maybe at 11, I was really looking at grown-ups and thinking, I wonder that I might lose that joy, because grown-ups didn't look as happy as I felt. So it was a fear of losing the joy that I had as a child. So I went on and then became a comedian. And that was interesting because I was watching people laugh and feel good, and I was coming really from a place of true joy and true playfulness in my spirit. And since then, I have literally become interested in helping other children become more joyful and more aware of the fact that they can actually raise their happiness levels in this world. I'll close basically by saying that a UNICEF study found that our children in the United States of America are the second least happy children in the world. So that not being acceptable, we're working very hard to give our children these tools.
You said that our children are the
least happy, second least happy children. The UK came in number 1.
okay.
Well, we don't want to be second in anything, so...
Good point.
James Hill, why is this an essential question now?
My area is obesity, and I had to think a little bit about why I was on a panel about play. But as I started thinking about it, if you're in the obesity world, really the model we're selling is deprivation. go out and give up all the foods you like, go and do some sort of activity that you don't like, and we can't figure out why people aren't lining up to do this. So I think we need a different model. I think what we're talking about is how do you achieve a weight that's satisfying and happy for you? And I'll give you an example on kids. I have two, a 20-year-old and an 18-year-old, and some of you in the room will relate to this. They didn't know what imaginary runners were in baseball. We would go out, and if you didn't have enough people to play baseball, you'd have imaginary runner on second base. Well, kids today can't do this unless it's organized, unless the parents are there, and you have 9 kids, and you tell them exactly where they're going to do. So, and I go by these gyms now that are attracting kids, and I'm thinking, wait a minute, is that the right way to do it? Because kids have this natural ability to be active because it's fun. And I think by the time we're adults, we're seeing physical activity not as fun. It's something, oh my gosh, I have to go and do it.
But are we programming play out of our lives just because we've got, we think, so many other things to do?
We're not exactly great role models for our kids. As an academic, I have colleagues in Europe, and you try to get them to do anything in August, forget it. It's vacation time. Here, we're looking at more opportunity to work. So is it too surprising our kids don't know about play? Because we don't know about play, and we're not very good role models.
Deepak Chopra, what do we know about what play does to us physically?
But first I want to tell you about this 95-year-old fellow who ends up in hell. And the devil is showing him around. And he sees another 95-year-old with a 20-something girl on his lap. And he says, that doesn't look like hell to me. And the devil says, it is for the girl. So I just want to spend two minutes talking about the biology of joy, the biology of humor, and the biology of play. Just 2 minutes, and then we can open it up to questions. We have 3 brains. Human beings have 3 parts to our brains. It's called the triune brain. So the first is called the reptilian brain, which is about 300 million years old. And it has as its function just basic survival, what we call the fight or flight response. Okay? When I was in medical school, the way we remembered the functions of the reptilian brain were the 4 Fs: feeding, fighting, fleeing, and reproduction. Then we have a second part to our brain. So that's 300 million years old. The second part of our brain is called the limbic brain. It's a bulbous, it sits like a cap on the reptilian brain. It's 100 million years old. And it's found only in mammals, not in earlier species. So mammals have this very unique expression called play. All mammals play. All mammals play. And all mammals sing to their newborns. And the limbic brain is responsible for our emotions. So before the limbic brain, all species do not have emotions. Reptiles do not have emotions. But mammals have. And we now know that emotional bonding, which occurs through play and also through singing in the first 3 years of life, actually creates the stability of our healing mechanisms, homeostatic mechanisms, self-repair mechanisms. If you deprive a child of play, especially in the very early stages, then they'll have later on, and there's a paper, by the way, in this year, Psychosomatic Medicine, you might want to look it up, February 2nd, which shows the relationship between child abuse or even verbal abuse and autoimmune disease 20 years later, 30 years later. Hospitalization from serious illness in children who've not had emotional bonding. Then we have a cortical brain, so that's 100 million years old. Then we have a cortical brain, which is, of course, we think the basis of our rationality. It's only 4 million years old. So much though we like to think we're rational beings, we actually bristle with emotions. And emotions have biological function. All emotions have biological function, even the so-called toxic emotions. So fight is emotion, the fight response, so you can escape a predator. Flight, same thing. Jealousy is the potential loss of reproductive chances. Disgust is the nauseous revulsion at the likelihood of rotting foods. But as we move up in evolution, we find that survival depends on social interactions and bonding. And so we have this resonance between the cortical brain and the limbic brain, which leads to emotions like love, compassion, joy, humor, which is a way of shifting perspective, and of course then the higher emotions like intuition, insight, intention, imagination, creativity, and a sense for the sacred. And we've deprived ourselves in this society of these emotions, which are really, really the one thing that make the difference between health and illness. Sorry for taking so long.
I love that. So great.
While it's encouraging and terrific that you've started this foundation and you're so interested in this work, it's kind of depressing that you actually have to sell somebody on the idea that a kid needs to play. That you have to convince them.
Well, we've gotten away from that. I mean, we're actually eliminating recess now in schools. I was just actually speaking to Arnie Duncan, the Secretary of Education, about this, and we were talking about the state of the mind of our children today. You know, we're looking at schools and thinking that they're broken. It's the kids who are broken. We really have to take a look at systematically what is wrong and what this epidemic is about. So, you know, these are the things that it is depressing. It absolutely is. You know, and obviously that's the other side of joy and happiness. So we have to, in some way, reconnect them with play. Interesting note that children who actually, and this has been proven, and there's evidence based on this, is that children who play in schools and who are given the opportunity to play come back and actually academically excel more so than the children who actually are just academic, and then there is no proof that says that makes a child smarter. So the play is important. It rests the brain. It allows the child to get them off point and get them back and get excited about learning again. It's, you know, and yes, you need to go in there with evidence. No one, to me, it's a no-brainer. If you really understand that playfulness is important for a child, you have to have quantitative evidence for anybody to actually look at it as viable. And you know, yes, we're doing a lot of research in this field, and we're going to continue to, and it's vitally important. But I just can't imagine that every school in the United States of America, Canada, or wherever doesn't understand that these values are very important for our children's well-being.
James Hill, if you look at things written for and about children in the late 19th century, very, very strong feeling that children were unruly, willful, that without a strong hand, without being throttled, tied down, they would just go crazy. So a lot of pedagogy was about control, and a lot of sort of our moral undertone in thinking and talking about children was about how do we get these wild beasts to be nice. And whenever I pick up now a solicitation to subscribe to some magazine for kids, I think, this solicitation is not written for a kid. A kid is going to hate this because it says something like, fun with a purpose. And I'm wondering if we've come full circle and are so afraid for our children that we've got to keep them learning and polishing up their resume at 8 all the time.
Yeah, I think it's true. And, you know, we criticize our schools for a lot, and I don't want to really do that too much. But just the whole idea of kids sitting at desks, sitting still for 5 or 6 hours a day. Anybody that's ever had kids knows that that's not very tough. And I think oftentimes we tend to over-medicate them if they're not happy sitting still. And I think Goldie's point is one that schools need to realize is they're doing these things for academic achievement, but what they have to realize is actually taking time out for play and activity is probably a better way to get there. So more time at math sounds like it's the best way to get there, but in fact it may not. Give you one great example in schools, because I'm both interested in diet and physical activity. When you have schools that have lunch followed by recess, kids just can't wait to get out to recess, so they don't eat a very good lunch. When you switch it around and put recess first, so recess time, then you get a much better play time, and you get a much better nutrition side. I think we need some innovations in schools, and it may be a crazy idea, but people oftentimes ask me, what do we need to put in the schools to solve obesity? Maybe we need to take out something. Maybe we need to take out the desks. What would that look like if we had schools that had no desks? Can kids be active and play and learn at the same time? I think they probably can. Now, that's probably pretty scary for teachers that have done this a certain way for many, many years. But we need some innovation here. And I would love to see some schools try some things like active classrooms. Who knows? Maybe it'll increase test scores more than more time at math.
But isn't the culture pushing in exactly the opposite direction?
It's pushing in exactly the opposite direction, but we're not making the progress we want. So it's maybe it is time to innovate and say, let's try. And I'm not saying let's do it all over. I'm a big believer in pilot projects. Let's take some schools where the teachers are willing to do this, and let's try it and see what happens. And if it doesn't work, I'll be the first to say, let's try something else.
It seems to me that people, in the school systems are getting a little bit more open to doing pilot programs. I think there's a real thirst for it. And one of the things that, sort of eating and obesity and these sort of things has to do, I think, very much with stress-related issues. And there was a wonderful study done with an orthopedic doctor that dealt with children, and 125 of those kids came in and they were treated, and only 2 of them actually had a true medical condition. And one of them, the doctor had asked each parent, is your child stressed? And the parents all said no, they're not stressed. So they don't see. We're not training parents to see and be aware of their children's stressors. So one of the things, if I may share this in sort of our mindful breathing within our own program, has really helped our children get quiet, get centered 3 times a day, to be able to really be more contemplative, more self-aware in terms of mindful eating, mindful tasting, mindful smelling, hearing, and so forth. So exactly in those areas where you can quiet a child down long enough to be able to absorb the information, open up the prefrontal cortex, if you will, and so eating and obesity and joy and all these things, they can begin to gather around a little bit, Because don't you think stress is a huge issue?
It is, and I would even go one step further, is we're finding a relationship with disordered sleep in kids and obesity. And I think the stress, the lack of activity ties into this. So you have kids that don't sleep well and they're stressful and they don't perform very well in school.
Right, exactly. It's a vicious.
Well, I don't want this session just to be about kids, because we have a room full of self-selected type A personalities here who didn't get to Aspen by relaxing a lot. What kind of adults do these kids that we're talking about become, Deepak?
Important that we have data to support what we're saying, but it's also sad that something that's so playfulness is the essence of spontaneity. And it's been around for thousands of years, and we've lost it now. And there is no correlation between academic performance and success in life. Mahatma Gandhi didn't have a good education, nor did Winston Churchill was a poor student. And if you try and look at success in life and academic performance, there's no correlation. So we need to know that. Also, the essence of creativity comes from play.
Right.
Creativity is an expression of play. If you look at some of the most important discoveries of the last century, quantum physics, for example, you had these people, Niels Bohr and Heisenberg and Max Planck and Schrödinger and Paul Dirac and all these amazing minds, but they actually played together. They met, they talked, they went out for outings, and they would brainstorm, but playfully. Okay, so all creativity it comes from incubating, being mindful, being playful. We know so much about the biology of stress, but how many people actually know about the biology of joy or playfulness? Very few people have actually investigated what it means. And not only recently, scientists have begun to show that when you are experiencing joy or playfulness, your brain secretes high levels of these neurotransmitters, which everyone's heard about now, serotonin, dopamine, oxytocin, opiates, and they have very interesting biological effects. For example, serotonin is associated and correlated with self-esteem, sense of self and confidence. Dopamine is an antidepressant. Oxytocin is a pleasure hormone. We used to think, when I was in medical school, we thought the only function of oxytocin was milk secretion and expulsion of the fetus. But now we know that oxytocin goes up in sexual excitement, for example, but any pleasurable experience. And finally, opiates, of course, make you feel intoxicated, the runner's high. Now, it's very interesting that all these four go up when you're experiencing joy or playfulness. And there's no drug that can do that. Serotonin uptake inhibitors will act only on serotonin, not on dopamine or opiates. So playfulness is actually the essence, expression of your soul, of your spirit. And it simultaneously causes the secretion of these wonderful chemicals. But now also it's known that these neurotransmitters are immunomodulators. They modulate and fine-tune the activity of your immune system. So as more and more of this kind of data emerges, I think we'll have to go back to working at being spontaneous. Just like we work to have a vacation. You go to for a vacation and you come back more exhausted than you were before the vacation. It's part of our Judeo-Christian Protestant ethic, that hard work is the basis of success. Oscar Wilde once said, hard work, driving ambition is the last refuge of the failure.
That's pretty.
We're proud that we don't take vacations and we don't use up all of our vacation days.
But how do you find the thread again? How do you relearn a forgotten social construct? How do you work at, and not make it quite so much work, getting play back into the life in an unremarkable way? I mean, if you can look back at the last 72 hours and account for almost every minute, you've been overthinking this. So I'm wondering how we re-engineer a day, a week, the time that we have together, the time that we have with family, so that there is no planned activity.
I think you start with intention. I think it starts with the intention of wanting to be happier, because nothing can start without the will to do it. So once you set that pace for yourself, then you have to look at the choices you make and be very conscious of your day. And I mean, for instance, this is an example for myself, is that I was riding to work one day, and I was going to do a film, and I was in the back of the car being driven, and I watched myself. I actually came out of myself, which we humans can do, which is awesome. I think we're the only animal that can. And I was looking at myself, and my eyes were dead. I looked at this, and I went, oh, your eyes, there's no joy in them. I said to myself, no, this isn't acceptable. Goldie, I said, I want you to look up at that tree. I want you to look at things like you've never seen them before. I want you to pretend you just landed from Mars, and you're looking at these trees going, look at the color, look at the texture, look at the light. And I actually pretended. And I made my eyes, of course, I'm an actress, so I was able to do it, but I made my eyes look like a child. I mimicked a child. And I looked at this, and for the first time, I could able to see, I didn't see that tree riding down this road. I never knew that house was there. Oh, look at that. I got to work. I was so happy, and everyone was so miserable. They said, what happened to you? Well, the point is the intention to do these things really makes a difference. So do you feel tired sitting at your desk? Get up, do some exercise. Do you want to listen to some music? Does that raise up your mood? Absolutely. Go over and dance. Feel your body. These are ways, I think, that we can get out of, the doldrums that we get into and realize that we have a reward at the end of it. So that's all the emissions of all of these neurotransmitters. So the next thing you know, you're going to say, oh, I want to do that again. So let me pause now. Let me stop. Let me plan this trip. Let me go fishing down the river. Let me take these 6 hours. You deserve it. But it's all intention and wanting to do it.
Do you think that sort of kids naturally have that and we teach them not to express that? That they're sort of born with this wanting to express the joy, and somehow we sort of get them into the suppressing that?
Children learn through play, really, and that's something to watch. Yeah, I mean, I don't know that we suppress the little ones, but we certainly do once they get into school. And after 7th grade, the children actually start becoming more increasingly depressed. So, that's a very important thing to take a look at. But,
Because after 7th grade, they know how hard it's going to be to get into Stanford. Is there a mic out there making the rounds? See, this is the part where I have to concede to time's winged chariot here. There you are. Let's get the mic over here, and then over there, and okay.
Yes, my name is Patch. I've spent my lifetime in beverage of play. I haven't spent 1 minute not playing. And three things really concern me about what's happened to our society in play. First, I think television is the worst invention of the 20th century. Before we go to school, we put our kids in front of TVs, and then we've added computers and electronic equipment. Kids don't even know how to be outdoors now. In fact, their parents are saying, don't go outdoors because there are strangers out there. So play is... I teach at a children's circus camp, and if they come from that, they actually don't know how to play. They are very quick to learn, unlike adults. So I think the television and the electronic world has been a real disaster for play, for all ages. I think that we have a value system for centuries based on money and power over. This is a global value system. And within that context, play does not work. In fact, it gets you in trouble with that context. And I've lectured in medical schools in 68 countries and correspond with medical and nursing people in over 120 countries. And everywhere, because we teach goofy medicine, they then go back to their school or their hospital and they get in trouble. There have been medical students released from school because of play, unprofessional. So I think that relates to hierarchy and rank. And quite frankly, I think our school systems are a tremendous problem because they are designed to make good consumers and people who fit into that world. And so, just so anybody who's interested in intensive in play, we take clowns. Anybody can do it. We don't require any training. We've taken ages 3 to 88 to the worst of the human horrors of the planet, and universally, the over 6,000 people that we've taken have instantly become players.
Can I comment? First of all, I want to acknowledge you, Patch. I mean, you've done more for the medical profession becoming aware of the healing power of play and laughter than anyone else. And it's a great thing that you've done over so many years. So really thank you for that. And I want to acknowledge Goldie. I mean, she's brought so much joy and laughter over the years, you know. And, if you look at surveys recently on who people trust, I just saw a survey of journalists, and the most trusted journalist in the country, according to this poll, if it's reliable, was Jon Stewart. You trust people who can be playful. You bond with them. And when it comes to children learn through a phenomenon called mirror neurons. If you have a baby monkey, for example, it watches its mother or its parent peeling a banana, and then it doesn't have to learn how to do that. This is how we learn languages. I have a grandson now who's 16 months old, and he speaks Chinese, English, Hindi, and Spanish because his nanny is from Mexico. His mother is Chinese American. We speak Hindi and English, and he knows how to switch languages spontaneously. It's mirror neurons. So all our emotional skills are acquired by watching people, by watching our adults. And if our adults are stressed and unhappy, you're going to have an unhappy generation and a sick generation.
Yes.
Hello. I hear everybody discussing work and play as if there's a dichotomy between the two. And I'm wondering, can play be a way in which we just approach every moment, regardless of what we're doing, that work can be play and play can be work? And that's the question.
It's, I remember in medical school, again, we had a professor from the United States, and he was teaching us medicine through the Socratic method. And learning was playful. He would say, pretend you were God. How would you design a fat molecule? And you would get so much creativity from the students, which surpassed anything we could read in a book. Work should be play. As what's his name? Walt Whitman said, my vocation is my vacation. Same. It should be the same. There, talking about obesity, I think you'd agree, Jim, that people eat only for two reasons. One, they're hungry, and two, they're feeding some other emptiness.
Mm-hmm. That's right.
Well, as you can imagine, the news hours are laugh a minute, so we incorporate a lot of play there. But seriously, though, the work of reporters, and talk to anybody who's been a reporter for a long time. The hours stink, you're away from your family a lot, and you become tribal and bonded with the people you work with. And when you're with the same people for 16 or 20 hours, there is some of the funniest people I know are reporters because we have to get through long and often very trying circumstances, and the only way to do it is to keep each other laughing and find something to laugh about in situations that don't seem very funny to other people. So, I don't know how people in other walks of life do some of the things they do, because it's deadly serious from bumper to bumper, and a lot is riding on it, and other people depend on their work.
I do think that for many Americans, they do separate it. The idea is you work in order to get time to play. And I think therein lies the problem. And I couldn't agree more with the comment of it shouldn't be here's work time and here's play time. There should be no barriers between the two. But I think for most Americans, it's the opposite. They work at jobs they don't like. There's no fun. There's no playfulness. They get that time on the weekend or vacations to play. And I think we've got it all wrong.
I think the big question always is, how do you change it?
How do you change it?
How does a new awareness come to the fact that each person has their own choice, basically, to make their workday better? And I think of people in cubicles who go to work every day, and there's no windows, there's nothing there. And so, there's always that part of your empathy says, well, gee, aren't I lucky? I get to go pretend for a living, or we get to go talk to people and learn new things. But there are a large group of people, most of them, who don't do that. So you figure out ways to elevate your day and give them ways of putting a picture of themselves when they were a baby where they see themselves smiling, or there's music, or there's some ways of bringing some joy into the workplace. Anyway, just a thought.
I'm Grace Bender, and I live in Washington, D.C. I was at one of the sessions here, and they were talking about how low math and science are in this country with our students. But I'm going to tell you, in Washington, competition and the stress that kids are in, because most of the schools are private schools. The public schools are a disaster. And the stress to get a child into the school on the parents is unbelievable. Every spring you hear of suicides in high school in these private schools, and it's really pretty pathetic. The amount of homework is almost equal in the evening to the amount of time they're in school. So how do you incorporate and let them be playful when the competition? I hope Deepak Chopra is right, because my son did so poorly in school. I hope. And he was the one that actually said to me, if they can't teach me in school, how can I learn it by myself at night? So I just would let him do whatever he could do. But I'm concerned about the number of hours that these kids are doing homework. And one other thing he said, in third grade, I tried to get him into a school, Murray School, for fourth grade, and he was not accepted. There were like 30 spots and 400 applying. And then in sixth grade, I tried to get him in Murray again, and I remember driving him for his interview. He said, do you know what it feels like to go back to a school that's already rejected you? So we are putting stress on them, but how would you suggest it's changed, but yet increase math and science?
I'll give you a personal example. You know, when my kids were growing up, I actually emphasized to them that their grades were not important, that how they did in school, or even if they went to college, it was not important. I said to them, you have to find your joy, and you have to find your unique skills, and you have to find a way to express those unique skills that bring joy to others. And I actually did this with my kids. My son was not good academically. He spent all his time reading comics, okay? Well, what did he do? He went to Brown University. I don't know how he managed to get in. No, my daughter went to Brown. He went to Columbia. I have no idea how he went there and got there. But guess what he's doing now? He started a comic book company and went to Richard Branson and asked him for $5 million to invest in his company, and launched this company and is now spinning off movies and video games and all kinds of things. At the young age, he's making more than I do, okay? And because he found his passion. Now, you know, Gallup recently did a poll on, and you might want to look this up. You know, if you go to Google, there's a type in strength finders. So every child that is born, there's a poem by Tagore. He says, every child that is born is proof that God has not yet given up on human beings. So every child that's out there has a passion for something. We come with this, you know. And we know we found our passion when we are expressing ourselves with joy and with humor and with playfulness. So Gallup has done this universal poll. It's called Strength Finders. You can go to the Gallup site, or you can actually Google it. There's a book around it. And I think the best thing you can do for your children is help them find their passion. Then you won't have to, you know, if you have a son who's weak in mathematics but loves to play tennis, what do? You get him a math tutor. You should get him a tennis coach. One day, he might win Wimbledon and hire a mathematician to be his accountant.
That's exactly right.
I think part of it in that situation sort of starts with admitting what's happening isn't working. I mean, if there are people that say, oh, the system's perfect, that's one thing. But if you say it's not perfect, or at least it's not perfect for every child, then we need some innovation. And again, I believe that within the education system, there are people that are willing to be innovators if they're allowed to be innovators. Back to this idea of let's try something. I think the fact that we have schools based on sports and math and science and everything is a good move forward, where each kid can find the one that fits with their particular way of learning and their passion.
There's a story in terms of discovering these things. I also was not a very good student, and my sister, really was worried about that. At the dinner table, she said, "What's Goldie going to do in life? I mean, she can't even type." And my mother said, "She'll dance. That's what she'll do. She's a dancer," which as I did since I was 3 years old. It's how I started. So, these are the things that I know. I was very supported. I brought home a B. It was like hallelujah. But, the pressure on grades I never had. I never felt that. I had certain dyslexia issues and so forth. But it doesn't mean, and these are things that our children also need to know. We need to not keep them in the dark. They need to know that, yes, some of us are dyslexic. Some of us have issues. But there is no proof to say that you will not do well in life. There are certain things about a dyslexic person. Actually, there's a great moderator, a great speaker. There are many, many things, as you can see here. And furthermore, but, these are, when you want to help a child feel better about themselves, you have to give them this information and support them with these things. And that will help eventually children with a greater capacity to understand themselves in relation to the world and relation to themselves, what is best for them. Creates a healthier system, healthier world. So, I think that those things are very, very important in terms of building this kind of self-awareness.
Goldie told us about the study where the children and only of the parents, only two identified their children as stressed, and it made me think of a definition of what's an alcoholic. The definition of an alcoholic is someone who drinks more than their doctor. And so I'm thinking that we as be the best judges of whether our children are stressed or not because we live in such a stressed environment. As a surgeon, I see lots of patients coming in, and I have to take a history, and the incidence of depression in adults is astonishing. My understanding is 1 out of 5 women carry a diagnosis of clinical depression, and it's diagnosed more in part because we have these medicines, which I think are very helpful in many circumstances. But my question is depression more common?
But doctor, let me stop you there for a second.
Okay.
When you said, I think it's because we have these medicines, do you mean that a diagnosis of depression triggers the prescription of the medicine? That because we have the medicines, we make the diagnosis?
Well, I think there's a chicken and the egg quality.
Okay.
It is certainly true that the diagnosis is being wrought more often today than it was 20 years ago. What I don't know is that because depression is more prevalent? Is it in fact that we have a bigger problem with depression because we grew up not playing and we're living in a stressed environment and all of that? Or was it the same before, it's just that it went unrecognized? And what should we be doing about this? I find depression it is a difficult problem for people because it's so self-defeating. It's I can't get there, I can't make this better. And what you described a wonderful story of looking out and saying, I'm going to look at it differently. It's a beautiful day out, I can see this tree. People who are depressed have great difficulty doing what you just described. And so I'm wondering, how do we work with this? Is it related to play? Is play a therapy for depression? Or for the panel?
This is a really good point. I think there are many sort of levels, I suppose, of depressed person. There's, clinically depressed people. I honestly think that if you don't read the newspaper and you're not bombarded with the bad news 24/7, fully turning on these things as we do, and you move away and you get closer to nature and you stop, associating with some of the negatives, that ultimately I think our society of in itself, the way it's moving technologically and so forth, actually creates low-level depression anyway. So if there's a proclivity toward depression, I certainly think that would certainly exacerbate it. Certainly with our children it does. And, one of the things in terms of just how powerful the media is and how irresponsible it is at the same time is that when a child looks at violent pictures, we think they're going to become violent. And, you think, well, now this is going to create, now my child is now going to become violent because they're watching people kill each other and there's blood. What's the real study of that is, that I had discovered, is that the children become apathetic. So they really go inward. They really don't care. They don't have any care about or empathy toward people. So as an interesting story, my son decided to do an experiment. It was a class experiment about empathy, really, and he went and laid down in a mall. He was about 18 at the time, 17. And just to see who would come and rescue him. And no one did for 20 minutes. So, this is where we're going, and this is what we want to try to help our kids become more sensitized instead of desensitized. So I think it goes along in terms with also what we avail ourselves to and allow to seep into our psyche, because I do think it does make a difference.
Can I also respond to that a little bit? I think we have more depression in this country than in many other countries. There are surveys to show that. The United States, in the last survey, ranked about 16th in happiness rating. So Venezuela, which is a poor country, Nigeria, which is a poor country, Cuba, which is, we feel so sorry for the Cubans. They were all scored much better on happiness than people from the United States. I was in Cuba for a seminar, and I was actually totally shocked to see how happy people were. Grandparents playing with their grandchildren on streets, poets and street minstrels singing on the street. I went to a restaurant, and the waitresses danced with you after the meal. So I asked my host, I said, "Why are people so happy here?" He said, "Because we don't have anything to buy. We can't buy anything. We focus on relationships. We are not a consumer society. We are a relationship society." And it struck me that we have a very ugly word to describe human beings in America. We call them consumers. What an ugly word to describe a human being with imagination and intuition and creativity and joy. Consumer. I mean, the image that comes is right there, So we describe success. It's the ultimate thing we can have, is success, but it's only described as instant gratification. If you can't believe you ate the whole thing, here's something for you. If you can't sleep, here's something for you. If you're depressed, here's something for you. While those antidepressants can be very remarkable in certain cases, 80% are prescribed unnecessarily. So, we have this idea of success only in materialistic terms. We do not define success as the realization of worthy goals or the ability to love or have compassion or to find the joyful source of creativity inside you. It's a cultural thing, and it's not going to go away easily. It's not going to go away easily.
Ray, I know you're the moderator, but we were talking yesterday, and you were telling me of a similar experience in Tanzania of how being poor and being happy might not be totally always associated.
Well, I am very careful about how I talk about this, because I don't want to sentimentalize grinding, terrifying poverty. But when I was in Tanzania just recently, I just came back, a lot of people just spend a lot more time talking to each other. A lot of time not, as we would look at it, doing anything. We would look at these people through our American glass goggles and say, these people are not doing anything. When in fact they're engaged in the business of living with each other. And it was, again, something I'm very, very careful about, because I'm not going to give away all my stuff. And I'm not going to try to be some plaster saint that says, oh, isn't it wonderful how poor people are so much more soulful and happy than we are? Oh, woe is me. Let me open up my laptop. But it is something to think about because of the way life is organized differently. In a society that lives very close to the soil, in a society where there's not a lot of alienation of work and production from where you live. Everybody works where they live, lives with who they work with, and works with their own family. There is no binary line, no binary functional line. I'm at work now, and now I'm not at work. Work is long and takes up a lot of the day because you're working just to provide the wherewithal to live until tomorrow and eat a couple of meals and make sure the people who you're helping support have enough to eat as well. But there is no separation between those two worlds, so they blend kind of unremarkably into each other, where people can step away from hoeing or stacking or bundling and just talk and laugh and hang for a while before then, quite unremarkably, going back to what they were doing again. Am I suggesting we all fly home and do that starting Tuesday? No, but it does give you something to think about because these societies had a much higher level of social cohesion. I was asking a Tanzanian why no one stole the items set up for sale on the side of the road. And at first, he didn't even understand the question. I mean, it was one of those can't take the Brooklyn out of the boy moments. But I said, no, but the guy went away and he left his cooking fuel. They stack up charcoal and sell it for families to cook their food. I said, why does no one just come by and take the charcoal? And the fun part was even getting him to understand what I meant about why no one would do that, because it just was inconceivable to him that anyone would, because it would signal a breakdown, and that way lies real danger. So they don't even contemplate it. But they laughed a lot, those the people in Tanzania, even though they lived a life that many of you in this room would not envy. Patch, go ahead.
In 39 years as a family doctor, I never disliked the patient enough to give them a psychiatric medicine. we use play, we use love and joy and nature and creativity and never needed. We had profoundly diagnosed people. You mentioned depression. Depression is a pharmaceutical company diagnosis. Depression is a symptom of loneliness. If you spent 4-hour interviews as I did and lived with your patients since their home is a hospital, you would see that never was somebody depressed after 24 hours of being in our hospital. Didn't mean they couldn't go home depressed, but once they were in a context of love and joy and play and engagement, not as a patient but as a friend, they stopped being depressed. If they said I'm depressed all the time, I handcuffed them to me. And I would count hundreds of times during the day when they were not depressed.
That's dangerous.
So,
Yeah.
Colin.
Could we go there and then here? Okay, sure. Go ahead.
Yes, my name is Craig Bowman, and I had a business that operated communities for retirees principally, and the product was considered play, and we had the tagline, "Welcome back to the world of play." That led to kind of a forum like this determining what play is, and one of the things we learned is there's a real misconception of just what play is. For example, we say play ball, and that leads to little league or competitive sports that are just as stressful as any work-related job and creates depression. And so we, in an operating way, had to come out with a kind of a distinction as to what play was. And one of the main distinctions we made was whether there was assessment associated with play, assessment numbers. For example, snorkeling, everybody considered play. Nobody said how far did you go down or numbers and all the metrics that we usually use in work. But golf, just an awful lot of other people. These are sweeping generalizations, to be sure. But where there was scores and competition and all of that, they were very distinct from where there was so-called pure play. And so I'd submit there isn't really clarity for many of us as to what play is.
That's a good point. We talked about that yesterday about, the word play,
Well, what do you use as definitions, panelistas?
I think the essence of play is spontaneity more than anything else. Joyful spontaneity in expression and love and emotional bonding.
Yes, sir.
We are where we are, and all of us in this room have to deal with what we have to deal with where we are. And I personally have been a fan of Goldie's for a long time. She looks like she's 39. I know she's a few years older. Could you share with us your routine, what you eat, and what your exercise program is?
My goodness. That's pretty interesting.
I feel like I suddenly turned into Phil Donahue. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Okay. All right. First of all, I make sure that seed of joy is alive every day. That's the main important thing. But I wake up like everybody else. I do my stretches. I do a little yoga stretch, a little downward dog, and do some sit-ups. And then I have my oatmeal, and I make my phone calls and, spend, fun time. I make sure I play every day. I really do. I play golf. I don't like to play golf with people who get angry. I play because I have fun. I laugh when it goes way off the toe. I laugh I get excited when I get it in the hole. I play games. I hike. I dance. Sometimes I turn the music on and dance by myself. So one day I put this on and I was dancing really crazy. I was a dancer, so I was doing, put it this way, high kicks in my living room. In the meantime, I'm all by myself doing high kicks and dancing, and my Katie and my grandson were coming over, which I forgot about because I was in complete abandonment. And suddenly I looked at the front door because we have a glass front door, and she's knocking on the door, Mom! And Ryder's going, go, go! And I'm doing kicks. I went, oh my God, I'm sorry, but open the door. But isn't it great to be able to have that as a connector? And as I talk about mirror neurons, Katie's the same way. So that's what I do during the day. And I meditate. I do spend time in contemplative practice. I always find time for gratitude. And I go to sleep so peacefully. I love the moment when I surrender to sleep and feel that feeling of tomorrow's another day.
It's lovely. Joseph Campbell tells a story about how he was in Japan at a Shinto ceremony with a lot of American cultural anthropologists who were studying, whatever. And somebody said to the Shinto priest, he said, it's all very interesting what you guys do, but I still don't get your theology. I still don't get your ideology. And the Shinto priest looked at him and he said, we don't have a theology. We don't have an ideology. We dance.
That's great. It is pretty wonderful. There's a lot in dance. There's a lot of joy, a lot of freedom, a lot of music. Oh, we do, your brain on music, but I wonder what happens to your brain on dance,
Yes.
My name is Steve Pollack. First of all, I'd like to thank everybody because this is a very, very important topic. I think one of the difficulties, of course, is the context in which we live. First of all, I just reiterate what Ray lived in Zimbabwe many years ago in the early 80s. But before that, I was a homicide journalist in Chicago. So in Chicago, I used to take friends to South State Street. Some of you may have remembered it, the Robert Taylor homes. I used to drive them 7 miles from one of the housing projects to the next visit. When I was in Zimbabwe, there were housing projects with urbanization and people being taken off the land. But one of the things that occurred to me was that there was a far lower level of emotional and spiritual deprivation than I would ever see in Chicago. And one of the other things that I've come to learn is there's a huge impact on disparities in income. When people are materially at a very similar level, they tend to interact much more. I live in Boulder, Colorado now, which is a rather wealthy town and becoming wealthier by the day. And what's happened now is that people are coming in and scraping our 1,900 or 2,000 square foot bungalows and putting up 5,000 square foot castles. Those people never emerge from those buildings. Every one of those neighborhoods has changed. You no longer see kids out playing. My question is this, is quite different. I left the U.S. in 1983 and was gone for about 20 years in Africa and in Europe. And what struck me when I came back in 1998 and then came back in 2002 is that I found that everything had changed profoundly. When I grew up, we had spontaneous baseball games. Kids played ditch at night at 9:30 and 10 in the night. Parents never knew where we were. You know, they knew we were safe. We'd come home. If my parents couldn't find me, somebody else's parents would find me. Today, everything is organized. Everybody worries about the kids. The kids are driven everywhere. Kids can't even walk 3 blocks to a bus to take a bus into town. And so what I'm wondering is, what's happened in this intervening period? Because it is the 60s generation that are the parents and the leaders of today. And what have we done? What have we created?
Great point.
Yes.
Hi, my name is Dawn Learcy. I'm a developmental and behavioral pediatrician. And Goldie, thank you so much for what you're doing. And it's really amazing that recess, which is a free time, is not in schools anymore. That's where children really learn how to play. And they really learn how to be outside. And they really learn how to talk to each other. And they really learn so much of their social emotional skills during recess. I think the big elephant in the room is No Child Left Behind. And and I think kindergarten used to be a play-centered time for children where they learned social emotional, they learned how to be in school. The expectations were to stand on line. Now they're expected to actually have pre-reading skills. The pressures on children are so tremendous and so early. In Sweden, they do not start reading until 7 or 8 years old, and they have the top 3 highest literacy rates in Europe. So starting children early and our own academic fears and our own fears for our children, I think, is taking away their play because we so love them and we so want them to do well. So I think we have to look in ourselves what we're doing to our kids and that we love them, but really to love them and try to let them play.
Yes. Yes.
Hi, I'm Laura Trice. I wanted to ask your opinion on the play thing. What it is it's an intangible thing. It's not tangible. It's not a bridge. It's not a building. It can't be graded. And so in our society, it seems like we don't necessarily value the intangible, which can be it's really important. And so I didn't know what your thoughts were as to, like if a parent has a choice between piano lessons, soccer, and a play date, or how do we communicate about play? Or I mean, I guess we can demonstrate it, but when parents are trying to make the right choice for their kids, and they're weighing that, and we have the intangible thing that can't be measured, that's really important.
Yeah. Well, I think that the main thing I think that the parent has to understand is that whatever form of play they may take, it's really about giving that child a brain break, giving their selves ability to sort of connect themselves to other things that will, give them a sense of joy and excitement about life and, creativity and all these things. So it's just a question of knowing what the result is, right? You want to give that to your child. I think then you choose what it is that actually they're interested in doing. They'll tell you. Do you know what I mean? I tell you, children will tell you everything if you just listen to them. And we got to get quiet.
I come from a wisdom tradition where the prevailing wisdom is that if you can see it If you can touch it, if you can taste it, if you can smell it, if you can think about it, visualize it, imagine it, then it's not real. Okay? What is real is the consciousness without which you can't do any of the above.
Right.
So you shift to the intangibles are the only valuable thing in life. Truth, goodness, beauty, harmony, love, all intangible. Joy.
I'm Wilma Bernstein from Washington, D.C., and my children, I am no grandmother of many grandchildren, and I always ask them, why is everything so structured? Why isn't there any time for free play? And the answer has been, over the many years, my son has said to me, I want to keep them away from kids that they might have a temptation for drugs, which are very prevalent in schools, and alcohol, and all of that. So everything is structured in how do you do the play, the free play, and have, when you live in a city, which I think it depends where you live. We live in Washington, D.C., and that can cause problems. So you do have that. How would you deal with that?
The only answer I can think of is education. And I think education comes first. And which is why we have got, the program that we've created for these children, which does give them a sense of, not only belonging, but also lets them understand what these different things do to their brain, how they understand their brain and the correlations to behavior and emotions and so forth. So, giving them this kind of opportunity to connect to the very things that they could cognitively make choices about. Also, bringing capabilities of experiencing school on a more playful level. So, in other words, making the classroom itself more joyful. Actually is, positive reinforcement. So, when you can help from the ground up, train, and I'm using the word train because we're in the clunker right now with all this. You've got to retrain the way people think, and I think this program and many others like it. And social emotional learning must be implemented in every school in America. And once it is, then you're going to create a new culture of schools. Also in terms of training our teachers. They also need to be trained differently. I mean, we have a lot of stressors in the 21st century now that we never thought we'd have. So we really have to be prepared. How do we educate around that? So I think it really lies in education.
I just moved 2 kids through the D.C. public high schools, and they would always tell me that there was the most dope and casual sex in the most expensive schools.
I just want to talk about the power and joy that can come from service. Last week I had the ability to be a part of Challenge Aspen. These kids have nothing, and we come there and we teach them music and dance, and we perform the play. These kids have autism, palsy, Downs, and watching what happened with these kids was amazing. So I think if we can teach that to kids and ourselves, we'll all be better people and grow and become stronger. So,
Deepak, isn't it true that the very part of the brain that is the pleasure part that receives, like if I do something nice to you, and it makes you happy and you feel good, that part of the brain is the same part of the brain that activates when you have done something good for someone else?
Yeah, there's a lot of research on happiness that's come out recently. I'm going to be speaking about this evening. But one of the best ways to be happy is to make somebody else happy.
Yeah, it's great.
There's one.
There's a question here.
Over here. I'm sorry. I'm just trying to keep track of everybody.
First of all, I want to say thank you very much for. My name is Al McPherson, and I don't like standing up because I'm probably taller than everyone else in the room. Fantastic panel today, very interesting, and thank you to everybody who's contributed with their perspectives. As a parent of 2 young boys that I'm raising alone, thought today about how we can do better by our children, and this is something that as a conscious parent has been very important to me, and I just want to share with you that my experience tells me that I can't do anything for my children before I do it for myself. So if I want my children to be more joyful or find more pleasure, I have to be more joyful and find more pleasure. And believe you me, that hasn't been so easy in my life. I noticed that my children are reflections of myself. And there are days that I am dissatisfied with my circumstances for whatever reason. And I have whining children. And so when I see my children whine, I realize that I have to develop a sense of humor. And in my parenting, I've understood that laughter opens up the heart. And if I can draw upon that tool, laughter, then I have a much easier time with my children and a much easier time with myself, by the way. So, I often wonder, how do I do this? How can I do this? And the acronym HOW for me is honest, open, and willing. And I think here, as people that are wanting to do better, what I see, as Goldie demonstrated, what I heard Mr. Chopra say is, if we are that ourselves, and we have an honest and open and willing approach, then we are opening up the door to change. And that's what this is about, I guess, is change. And so thank you very much. Thank you.
In the back.
First, thank you for this panel. I think it's probably the thing I think is most important in terms of thinking about health. They say you remember horrifying experiences clearly, and I remember vividly the day I first heard the word play date. I could tell you where I was standing. And I think it's a word that should be abolished from the English language.
It's so true. I love it.
When we use that word, we should realize we're failing our kids as parents. I was very fortunate as a kid. I had a month or two off every summer that was completely unstructured. And I grew up in the same environment that Mr. Pollack said, where we could play as kids in an unstructured way. And I think that play is literally just having unstructured time. When I first met my fiancée, I take a month off every year, and I turn off. I come from the computer industry, but I don't use computers during that month. I don't use cell phones. And I said, we're going away for a month, no electronics. She said, what are you talking about? And I said, wait, try it. So I think one of the things we have to do when we think about play is we have to move away from structure and say this is a time when kids don't have structure or adults don't have structure. You get to do what you want to do, but try not to structure that time, because the play date is antithetical to the very concept of play. It's an oxymoron by definition. And I noticed last year, or 2 years ago, I guess, when the two Nobel Prize speakers spoke, Peter Ager and Michael Bishop, and they described their childhoods. They described them really as unstructured, as having no real clear direction, as having figured out almost by accident what their passion was, and by playing, really, as they found those things that ultimately led to their Nobel Prizes. And I can tell you from personal experience, I take off those months every year, and any decent ideas I've ever had, and those are in debate, have come out of those time off, not during the time when I'm actually heads down. So I think the discussion you're having is probably the most important discussion we could have if we want to have a healthier country.
If you ask organizers of conferences what the most important attribute of a moderator is, they will likely not mention engaging, entertaining, all those things. They'll say, he ends the panel on time. So Goldie Hawn, Jim Hill, Deepak Chopra, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.